You're listening to the Property Nomads Podcast, your one-stop shop for property, business and travel-related content, tying it all together to help guide you towards success. If you like the podcast, please share with others, subscribe and leave us a review. So get your gear together and let's get going.
Delighted to be joined today by Peter Jones, aka the property teacher, who's actually just revealed to me that you've been doing property, Peter, for longer than I've been born, which is, I find that quite an achievement.
I find it really depressing, but there we are. I still feel like I'm 21, so does it matter? What's age, hey? It's all about experience. There we go. 100%.
And for those listening, Peter definitely looks like he's only 21 years old as well. We're going to cover such a great range of topics on this podcast episode, so it's a very sort of ad hoc talk. We're going to be covering everything from brokers to various strategies and, going into lessons that Peter's learned over his 40 plus years at the time of recording that he's been in property. So there's loads of great nuggets and wisdom for all of us involved. But Peter, start with the question, I suppose, 40 years in, and that's a fantastic achievement, but what got you started in the first place?
Well, it's a bit of an embarrassing story, really, Rob, actually, to be honest. Because as a teenager, I did the things that teenagers do, including I went to school, I did my A-levels, as they were then called, and we got to that horrible point where everybody said, what are you going to do after school? And I thought, well, I don't know, I don't care. What is there to do? And it was my dad, actually, who I think was probably a bit of a frustrated property entrepreneur. He wasn't ever able to do it. He's actually a civil servant in the Department of the Environment, Ministry of Transport. And he did really, really well in that. But I could see, looking back now, he always wanted to be in property. And so he sort of put a fatherly arm around my shoulder, metaphorically speaking. And he said, son, why don't you do something in property? And at that stage, because I was 17, doing my A-levels, all I wanted to do was just basically drink lager and smoke cigarettes and have a good time. I thought, well, if, 3 years at uni, probably won't have to do an awful lot. That sounds good. So I then applied to go to Reading, which it still is the top university for doing bespoke property training courses, degrees, I should say. And I went to Reading University, College of Estate Management, did my 3-year course in land management. And the natural consequence of that was coming out of Reading and becoming a Chartered Surveyor. 2 years later, having done my practical, the RICS, for better or worse, said yes, I could be a Chartered Surveyor. And that was it. I was in property.
Didn't realise you'd done that at Reading. That's where I'm from.
You look speechless. There you are. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what got me speechless.
White Nights, of course. White Nights. I used to work at the 3 Tons pub as a part-time job because 3 Tons is still there.
They definitely, last time I checked in, last time I was down there, White Nights are definitely still around and about. Yeah. 3 Tons is definitely still there.
Yeah,
the campus is still
and the bacon take where I used to get my dinner on a Sunday night and all this kind of stuff. There we go.
That one I don't know if that's
anyway. We can talk about Reading. We can talk about Reading too, but
so from there, become a Chartered Surveyor, and then you're not from Reading originally. So whereabouts?
No, I was living in Woking.
That's not too far.
Not too far, but
down the road. So what did you do straight after obtaining your degree at Reading University?
Yeah, well, getting my degree was a bit hit and miss, to be honest, and you haven't asked me how I did. I actually didn't do very well at university. So again, when I was running training and stuff, I say one of the encouraging things for everybody is that I'm useless at maths. And I also got a terrible degree. It didn't really suit me, university. I must admit, I was probably a bit too immature. Could have done with a year or two out to get myself together. But I'm glad to say that I did manage to get a job fairly quickly. Looking back on it, it was a bit of a miracle. And I ended up working in southwest London in a firm of estate agents in Wimbledon, where I was the trainee surveyor. A lot of estate agents have a surveying department, and those surveying departments are often on the panel for mortgage brokers and mortgage lenders. So I was going out doing structural surveys and mortgage valuations, working from within the estate agent's office in Wimbledon. So that was quite fun.
And going back when you said that your dad put a fatherly arm around you and, you went to university, there wasn't, to me that strikes me, there wasn't necessarily a love of property at the time, but is it fair to say through being at university and then subsequently you started to then develop a love of bricks and mortar property?
Wow. Controversial answer, no. Not at all. Actually, no. I mean, it's an interesting point. No, I don't love property, actually. But I do love what property allows me to do. Property gives me the freedom to be able to come and spend a morning with you in Hull, talking business and recording podcasts, which if I was in a 9 to 5, I just wouldn't be able to do this. And I'd have somebody telling me what I could do and what I can't do. So property itself, no, I'm not really enamored with bricks and mortar. It is just a commodity. I don't mean that in a harsh way, but it is. It's something which allows me to do what I want to do.
I think that's a great concept and a great way to think about it as well, because a lot of people, and again, people will be listening to this, and might have big portfolios, might have not bought a property yet, anything like that. There's really, and I always say the same thing, there's no, as long as you do everything ethically within property, it's not illegal, you're abiding by the rules, etc. There's really not a right or wrong way to do it. You might want to be incredibly hands-on. You might love property. You might not love property, and just, as you say, Peter, you use it for what it brings you. And I think that's an important thing for people to remember.
I think that what you've just said actually sort of resonates so much with me, because there is no right or wrong way so often. And as somebody who, as you say, the property teacher, I train on property and all that kind of stuff. One thing which really frustrates me is when I'm talking to a newbie, and it's not their fault, by the way, because if you don't know what you don't know it. But there's this presumption that there is a right way and a wrong way, or one way. And there so often isn't. And the way that you do property is going to be different from the way that I do property. And we all find our own way of doing it. And that is the right way. How does it work for you? Can you make it work for you? What do you need to do to make it work for you? And I get very frustrated going on the Facebook pages and the forums where I see people who actually don't know an awful lot, showing they don't know an awful lot because they're trying to guide other people, and the advice they're giving is usually terrible advice because they look at it from a very binary way. It's very yes or no, you can, you can't, right or wrong, and it's so often in property it's not like that.
Property could be full of grey areas. And I've been doing some work for a client recently, and involved a Grade 2 star listed building, and just to get everyone on site, a conservation officer, planning consultant, architect, someone from the council, took 3 weeks. So that's just an example. Okay,
and that was probably quick.
Probably, yeah, 100%. And because the property itself, or that particular property, can be considered quite specialist because of its heritage, status, and so forth. It just goes to prove that also property is not necessarily this quick fix thing. If it takes 3 weeks to get 5 people actually on site, think about what else can happen. Property is not a quick fix, and the fact that you preserved and you keep. Why? I would say the question would be, why do you keep going after 40 years? But then again, answering your own question, it's what property brings to you. So then the most appropriate question would be, what does property allow you to do, and how does it allow you to live your life?
It allows me to do the things I want to do, which is a phenomenal thing to be able to say. Whenever I say it in a context like this, I always think, wow, that is amazing, because it's not something I'm necessarily thinking about day to day. I mean, just to sort of wind back a little bit, I don't despise property, by the way. It's just not something I love, but there are aspects of property which I do enjoy. For me, doing the deal, and I often say that I'm a bit like Donald Trump. My son-in-law-to-be has actually told me not to say that anymore, because he said, what are you saying, you're a misogynist, racist? No, I'm not a misogynist, racist, but I do love doing deals. I just love doing deals, and that, I think, is a thrill, going and inspecting properties, and then at some point realising I'm actually going to buy it. Once I've bought it, though, not very interested. Quite like the refurb bit, particularly if you're taking something which is a rundown and making it into something nice. But after that, I'm really not interested. So park that, and then it goes. And then it's out of my life. Somebody else can deal with it. But what does it allow me to do? Well, it allows me to have freedom. And I did realise, I was thinking about my values about 2 or 3 years ago. What are my values? The values are the things that drive you, which make you make the decisions that you make, if that makes sense. A lot of makes in there. But it's the things that make you make your decisions. And my value system is freedom. And I don't know whether this comes back from having endured the 9 to 5 for Actually, in the scheme of things, not that long, but I think I was sort of properly employed for about 16 years before the system ejected me. But during that 16 years, it was quite high pressure. Maybe not. I don't want to sound like I'm bleeding heart here, because there's people listening to this who've probably got real pressure in their lives. But I ended up a bit of a miracle, really, because I came out of university with not a very good degree. 16 years later, when the system ejected me, I was a partner of a well-respected firm in the West End of London, which was quite an achievement. But it was pressure, and I hated it. And it wasn't just 9 to 5, because in those days it was sort of like 8 till 8, and it was probably worse now. And there was the whole thing with partners and working with people, and it just seemed like everybody just wanted to stab you in the back to get themselves ahead. Couldn't be doing with it. On top of that, all the commuting to get there in the first place. What a horrible day. You commute for an hour and a half to get to the place you hate, to spend 12 hours there, and then have to spend an hour and a half going home. Can't be doing with it. So freedom is what it's all about for me. So I've got the freedom now not to have to engage in all of that, and to be able to choose pretty much what I want to do and when I want to do it.
Two things when you say freedom. Number one, I think of Braveheart, because that's just a historical aspect coming in. But number two, freedom can mean many different things. From a property point of view, it can mean financial freedom and or time freedom. So are you using the combination of both time and financial freedom, or is there one more? Does one have a heavier weighting than the other?
Well, I think both and neither, in a way. I mean, they both work together. It's hard to have one without the other. And this is one of the things which I say about money. I don't get very excited about money. I'm not a very materialistic person. But if I didn't have the money coming in from the properties, then I wouldn't have the freedom. I would have to go and get a job. So I do need that. But I'm not really the sort of person who's always going through their bank account or thinking, how can I make another £1,000 or £10,000 or £20,000? Unless the need comes along. Like my daughter recently announced she's getting married, so I've got to get some money together to pay for her wedding, something like that. But in the normal course of things, the freedom is generated by the money, absolutely. So there is an element of financial freedom, which allows me to then have the time to do what I want to do.
And for the benefit of people listening, we're actually having a quick conversation off the record, won't be about your daughter getting married, because a lot of people, you've set yourself quite a cool target to be able to fund that. So do you want to explain how you've decided to fund that rather than just dive into your bank and pay for it?
Yeah, which I could do, by the way. But rather than doing that, I think it is a challenge. I think it's good to challenge oneself. I'm a great believer of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And I'm left to my own devices. My comfort zone would be small and cuddly, and I'll just crawl into it and stay there. So I've got to keep pushing myself to go and do stuff. And so when my daughter announced that she was going to get married, I thought, right, okay, rather than just going to the bank account and paying for it, let's make this into a challenge. How can I generate some more income? And so I started doing something which I hadn't done for a couple of years. I offered myself as a mentor, and I've started taking on mentorship clients. Because I'm naturally quite shy, and because there's an element of being accountable to people that actually doesn't really resonate with being free, funnily enough, which is perhaps a little bit of a contradiction, and maybe I'm being slightly hypocritical. But in terms of a challenge to push me out of my comfort zone and make some extra income, it's quite exciting. Quite exciting to do that.
It's always good to be accountable for people, and setting goals is something that is very important, not just to myself and yourself, but to a lot of people listening as well. Because if you set goals, it just helps you. Just the fact of having it written down, I don't know what the stat behind it is. Just the fact of having it written down, if you can see it every day, you can read it every day. It gives you a higher chance of actually succeeding just for writing it down. So is this a particular goal that you've written down yourself, or do you learn it in a different way? How have you set your goals?
No, I do have my goals in writing, and I think, I forget who it was who said it, Brian Tracy or something like that, said that a goal which isn't written down is just a wish or a hope. So I think having it down where you could read it, and reading it is very empowering. And I do believe there's this connection between writing and reading in your subconscious. And I do believe that your subconscious spends its time working on delivering your goals. Human beings are goal-seeking and goal-achieving creatures, and we need to sort of feed that. And I agree with you. I mean, I often say and often think to myself that when I set a goal, I tend to achieve stuff. And when I don't set a goal, I can bubble along, not really getting anywhere. So setting goals, I think, should be everybody's priority. And not just, New Year's resolutions, which I kind of don't like anyway, because most New Year's resolutions tend to be negative. It's usually about giving up, isn't it? You give up eating donuts, or give up doing this, or give up smoking or something, which I suppose is worthy. But I'd much rather set a positive goal, and you can do that anytime. And you should be constantly reviewing your goals all year.
Definitely. Exactly something that I do. But this podcast isn't about me. It's about focusing on other people. In terms of pushing yourself for pieces, you mentioned that you're relatively shy. You are accountable for other people when you're mentoring them and so forth. But going back to perseverance and goal setting, in terms of property, I'm sure people will be listening to this going 4 years plus. No, Peter must have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of properties. How does your portfolio at the time of recording roughly look like? Roughly how many have you got? What is it? Predominantly buy to let? Is it a mixture? Tell us a bit more about that side of things.
Yeah, well, because I've been doing it for 40 years, I started off, like 100 years ago, and the only strategy which people were really doing or talking about when I started was buy to let. Well, I'm definitely a buy to let man. I'm not against the other strategies, by the way, horses for courses, but I'm a buy to let man. And I suppose the nearest equivalent to a buy to let is a flip. So I like flips as well, buying a property, maybe adding a bit of value and then selling it on. So my two main strategies for the last 20 years, I've been investing for myself for 20 years. Prior to that, I was working for other people. So I've got my current portfolio, 73 buy-to-lets, 2 HMOs, and my latest madcap scheme is I'd love to build houses, Rob. So I've got a little piece of land which I bought with a JV partner, and we're currently arguing with the planners as to what we can use that land for. And just to give you a scale of the problem in this country, because we all know there's a housing shortage, don't we? And we all know there's a need for affordable housing, don't we? And I want to build little affordable houses. This plot of land will take, 3 houses? So it's not like it's a 300-acre, residential estate. But I've been arguing with the planners now for 2.5 years about these 3 houses. Can you believe it? Could have had these built and, families could have moved in a 1.5 years ago. So there we go. Getting on my soapbox here, having a bit of a rant. But having said all of that, though, I'm very excited about the prospect of becoming a developer as well as being a landlord. And I can see that the way that political winds are blowing, actually, there's a lot to be said for actually showing that you're creating something within society and within the economy, which I think politicians will probably resonate with a little bit more than just being a landlord.
Well, I would sincerely hope so. You've just highlighted a great challenge there. 2.5 years on a plot of land, you're talking about three dwellings, effectively. And I suppose this is where some cynicism might come in, is having gone through the planning process you have, and myself as well, I've gone through it. To an extent, I don't necessarily think it matters who's in charge of the country. It's the people within the respective councils and the planning departments that need, I'm not going to say a good whack, that's not the right term for it. They need a good talking to, because my opinion is, it doesn't really matter what government's in charge, it doesn't matter what policies they set out about, you can go and do this on that site, or you can go and do this, or, extend the local area plan and let's get some more houses going. Ultimately, that decision comes down to the planners. And I kind of feel that people that are just, going to the government and going, oh, you're not doing enough here, there, there. I think that people should be directing that at the planners of the relevant councils and departments, because they're the people that ultimately, at the end of the day, 2.5 years over just 3 dwellings.
It's ridiculous.
It's mad.
Yeah. But I do wonder whether the Secretary of State actually knows what's going on. And if actually I went and spoke to Robert Jenrick, who's now the new housing minister, and actually showed him as a case study, look what has happened. We could have had 3 affordable houses up, a year and a half ago. But it's just been bogged down with somebody who works in a planning department and they're part-time, they're only there 2 or 3 days a week, blah, blah, blah. And every time we sneeze, they want a new plan drawn. Is it really necessary? I wonder what would actually happen.
Yes, so do I. I always say that housing ministers are like Chelsea managers. They're changing every year. And there's no consistency, although saying that Chelsea do keep winning trophies. But yeah, by the by, having constant changes in a role such as the housing minister, that doesn't help either, because then there's no real level of consistency. As you say, if the goalposts are moving all the time, no wonder we struggle to get stuff done in this country.
And of course, the other, this isn't a podcast about planning, I guess, but the other problem, of course, I've only been dealing with the paid official. But of course, there's another level of bureaucracy, which is if it went to the committee. And the committee, of course, is voted people who've been elected. Butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, who suddenly get their hands on making the decisions as to what we can actually do in this country, just because they fancied standing as the local councillor.
So you've not got even, as you said, it's not necessarily about planning, but this is fascinating because it highlights a grave challenge that I think a lot of developers have, possibly at the moment, is that you've not even got to the stage of it going to committee yet. You've still been debating with the same person for 2.5 years over 3 dwellings.
Yeah.
Obviously without tempting fate or anything like that, how much more can you dive into that, just to give people that are listening a really good understanding of how nitty-gritty these sort of things can be?
Well, I won't go into all the details because there's been just so many things, but one of the things which is totally ridiculous is that this plot of land is in a cul-de-sac, and in the cul-de-sac there are 2 other houses. Now, when you go up to the top of the cul-de-sac, it becomes a T-junction with the main road. But this is a main road in a fairly small town/village, so it's not very busy. But one of the objections which came back actually from Highways, which they sent back to the planners, was that there are double yellow lines at the junction, and people are parking on the double yellow lines, which means that the view across the junction is obscured. And the planner was throwing this at us as a reason for not doing the development. And we had to say, well, look, these people who are parking on the double yellow lines are actually breaking the law. You should get traffic wardens to go and give them a ticket. You can't just say we can't develop this plot because there's parking on double yellow lines around the corner. But that's the level of nonsense which you've actually got to. So if the housing minister listens to this, please, this is the kind of nonsense which in real life we're dealing with out there.
Unbelievable.
You're speechless, aren't you?
Second time you've caught me speechless. That to me sounds, and I suppose for a lot of people listening, that sounds unbelievable. But that being said, having gone through not a process as rigorous as what you're going through, Peter, that it's also quite believable that these are the things that get popped up. And yeah, have you got any more plans to do any more developments after you get this one done?
Yes, I have. But I'm now thinking, man, what's the best strategy? Do I get the land and then get planning? Or do I get land which has got planning so I can then crack on and start on day one? And I think probably I'm formulating the strategy, but it's probably going to be doing a bit of both. So I'll be looking for smallish plots because I like the idea of smallish plots, not putting all your eggs in one basket. Maybe getting a plot which has already got planning, maybe somewhere like 4, 5, 6 houses. And then also looking for a plot of land where maybe I can afford to spend 2.5 years getting planning to supplement that and do the two together.
Going back to the buy-to-lets, and you say that one of the things that excites you is getting the deal negotiated, and then the refurb to an extent, and then after that, I'm going to just make a guess that you leverage out the management side that gets let out, etc. How have you found, touching on this development again, how have you found that process so far? So has the art of negotiation been equally as exciting? Has the couple of years spent with the council been exciting yet tedious, or is it just a complete drain on your energy at the moment?
I'd say tedious. That hasn't excited me. But as I said at the beginning, I'm doing this with a JV partner. And so I'm really sort of tasked my JV partner, who is an experienced developer and who has access to the architect to sort all of this out. So I haven't been sort of at the coalface actually talking to the planner across the desk. When it comes to buying properties, though, when it comes to actually doing the deals, I will be involved in that, the purchasing. I love doing that.
Do you have a plan just to keep on going and going and going and going and going?
Yes, despite my vast age.
21, you're not a day over 21, Peter, don't worry about it.
I have no plans to stop at the moment. I enjoy it too much. And I think the world has changed, When I came out of uni, 40 odd years ago, 37 years ago, people were thinking in terms of a career and retiring and getting a pension. But I mean, that's changed so much, even in just the last 10, 15 years. I can see that, most of us are probably going to be working for life, aren't we?
I would have thought so.
It's going to become more the way, isn't it? Things like, final salary pension schemes are just going to disappear. The papers keep telling us that most people aren't paying anywhere near enough into their pensions. So a lot of people, if not the majority of people, are going to get to pension age and find that there's nothing in the pot, and they'll have to keep working. So I'd much rather control and own that situation and be doing something I love and just keep going. My property portfolio is my pension, though. So in that sense, I'm sort of maybe slightly lucky that I've sort of created that and I can live off that. But there's also a great incentive to make sure it keeps going and it runs smoothly and the right things happen at the right time.
Same here. I mean, there's a bit of a difference between us, and age difference. I say that in the most politest manner possible. But you're absolutely right. Once you're involved and you're looking at what's going on macroeconomically, and you start to realise that actually the government probably aren't going to look after you. You should really go and look after yourself to the best of your ability. Then getting involved in accumulating assets, i.e. property, actually quite a smart thing to do.
Well, you would think so. And of course, I kind of got the feeling a few years back that the government were encouraging us to do this. I don't remember, but about 4 years ago, was it now? I think it's George Osborne at the time decided that we could take part of our pension money out tax-free. And there was a lot of chat at the time that I remember at the front page of the Daily Mail, they were saying everyone was going to go off and buy Lamborghinis, which I thought was very patronising. Why would people go off and do that? But of course, a lot of people took the money out of their pensions and they put it into property. And then, of course, the next thing that George Osborne did was he decided to make sure that the tax benefit of property evaporated overnight, and with Section 24, which meant that we couldn't then offset our mortgage interest against the rent when we're calculating our income tax. All that kind of came into then to sort of discourage us from doing property. So it seemed like getting a very mixed message from the government. But by and large, notwithstanding all of that, if you know what you're doing, if you've got the right strategy, if you set it up properly, then I still think, as things stand, property is a great thing to get into.
It definitely is. And I suppose the next question would be, because you mentioned, we've mentioned a couple of times that, been in the property sector, the sphere for 40 plus years. But in terms of buying properties yourself, it's only been about 20. So was there a particular moment that made that switch flick in your head? And how did you come across your first property? You're an accidental landlord, and did you just build upon that? So many questions.
Gosh. Well, while I was still gainfully employed, a friend of mine who's also a surveyor said to me, why don't we do a flip? I mean, he didn't use those words because people didn't talk about flips in those days, but that's what he meant. And I was thinking, well, why would I want to do that? Because I've got a job and I've got an income. There we are. This mindset. I was yet to have this entrepreneurial awakening. But I thought it's an interesting idea. Now, it just so happened that my father had actually just died, which isn't a good thing, but one of the consequences of that was that my mother had quite a lot of money which she wasn't using, and it would have been good to give her a return. So, as neither my friend nor myself actually had any money, I said to my mother, would you like to fund this flip? And she said, okay. So whilst we were still working, my friend and myself bought a property in Crawley, because I was living in Surrey at the time. Crawley's a little bit off my patch, and it used to take me like an hour to drive there every weekend. We would work on this property at the weekends only, and we completely renovated it. My friend was quite hands-on. He put a new bathroom and kitchen in. He could do a bit of plumbing. I couldn't do anything like that. Horror of horrors, looking back now, the whole house had about an inch thick of Artex all over every wall and every ceiling. And I spent about a month going down there day after day, scraping all this Artex off the walls and the ceilings, which of course, now I'm thinking to myself, was it full of asbestos? Well, I'm still here, so hopefully it wasn't. But nowadays you wouldn't do that. You'd have an asbestos test and you'd probably get it dealt with properly. Skim over it or get somebody else in who could actually get rid of it properly. So you learn these things as you go along. And that was our very first property. And it took us months and months to get this property done because we're still working and we're trying to do all the work ourselves. So many lessons to learn from that. Don't do it yourself, get the team in. Speed is just as important as saving the costs. We thought we were being clever, saving money by doing all the work ourselves. But of course it took, about a year to do this flip when it should have probably taken about 3 months. But that was the beginning. So I had that experience and background. But the thing which really flicked the switch, as you put it, was I was made redundant. My firm, which was a firm of commercial chartered surveyors in the West End of London, doing commercial property valuations, dealing with commercial property, the recession of the 1990s came and the commercial property market just went down the pan. Am I allowed to say that on the podcast?
Of course you can use expletives if you want, it doesn't matter.
And I was very good at what I did, but what I did wasn't needed. So unfortunately, the other partners said, Peter, we're going to have to come to some kind of arrangement. You're going to have to go. And so a little bit of a sort of a choky moment. Well, that's great. What am I going to do? But at the same time, slightly excited because I could draw on the experience I had with my friend. And I knew that I could go and do something for myself. So the very first thing I did, after having been made redundant, was I went back to my mother and I said, Mum, can I borrow some more money because I need to go and do another property? By that time, of course, she'd had her money back from the first investment. And so she funded my first flip, which I did solo. I went out, I spent a couple of months going around all the local estate agents looking for something which was in a horrible state. I eventually found a property where a poor old guy in his 80s or 90s had actually died. Because he didn't have any family, nobody knew he died for a few days until... In those days, there was milkmen who used to put milk bottles on the doorstep, and the milk bottles were accumulating, and the neighbours got suspicious and called the police. They came and knocked on the door, and they went up to his bedroom, and the poor guy was dead in his bed, which obviously very sad. But the consequence of that was that his family wanted to sell his house. He hadn't done anything with it. He probably bought it in the 1930s. It needed everything doing to it. So I bought it for cash, and that became my first solo project. And that got me started.
Flipping can be quite a cool strategy to do, and a lot of people would consider that to be chunky money. So do the work, obviously sell a property, nice chunk comes in. Whereas on the buy-to-let side, to an extent, once it's been bought, renovated, refinanced, and with a lettings agent, it's quite relatively passive. So to this day, do you work these two strategies side by side, or are you going to be looking at the development side to supplement increases in purchases of more buy-to-let properties?
That is a very good question. I have worked these strategies side by side. When I first started, I was doing more flipping than I do now, for example. Mm-hmm. But I think they work really well together. I mean, one of the great ways to combine the two, for example, particularly if there's anybody listening who thinks, well, I haven't got very much capital, so I don't know how to actually fund my buy-to-lets. Borrowing some money, using that money to do a flip, generating a profit with that flip, and then using the profit to be maybe the deposit on your buy-to-lets can work really well. By the way, not my strategy. There's other trainers out there who've trained that, but I can see that there's a lot of wisdom in doing that. So that's kind of what I've done over the years, but as I became perhaps more financially free, there was less impetus to get the chunky money, as you put it, and so I was more likely to hold properties. But every so often, if the opportunity comes along, I'll do a flip just to keep topping up the bank account, just to make sure there's plenty of cash flow in any business is important, of course.
What would you say the key lessons have been? I mean, if you had to pinpoint 3 key lessons, for example, that you've taken from your years of experience to pass on to other people that, might just have 1 or 2 properties, or, they're looking to slowly and sensibly accumulate, what 3 pieces of advice do you think you can give to them?
Well, the one key piece of advice, because there are a number of sort of sub-points, but I'll start with the one key. And this is actually probably going to surprise you or surprise the listeners, because it's not actually about property per se, But whether you're going to make it, whether you're going to achieve or not achieve, whether you're going to be a success or whether you're not going to be a success, it all depends on your mindset. Put another way, on your outlook. So understanding that it's all about taking action, understanding that it's all about disciplining yourself so that you take the action, I think is absolutely key. And I meet so many people who want to be in property, but they can never actually bring themselves to take the steps, to take the actions which are necessary to be successful in property. It is all about taking action, but that action comes from what's happening in your head. If you're not confident in yourself, and by the way, you don't even have to be confident in yourself, but you just need to be convicted in yourself that you're going to go and do it. You have to have the mindset, I think, behind it. Because there's so many things. I mean, another point, but it kind of comes from that, is not being scared of borrowing money. Because again, I meet people who say, well, I'd love to be in property, but I'm worried about losing everything, particularly if I'm using other people's money. Well, that's great. And I understand that. And it is better than being, I don't give a stuff about losing other people's money. But ultimately, if you're going to do property, you're probably going to have to do it with other people's money unless you're already a multimillionaire. Because property, even cheap properties, are expensive. So, you're going to spend the rest of your life saving to buy one, or are you going to build a business? And if you're going to build a business, you're going to have to borrow. Now, I agree, you don't want to lose the money, but if you do the right things, like get yourself educated, so you understand what you're doing, you understand the strategy you're following, if you understand the type of property you're looking for, if you learn how to analyse a deal, do your due diligence to make sure you buy the right properties, then hopefully you're not going to lose everything. And by the way, it's actually very hard to lose everything in property. It's almost like a theoretical concept. I know people have, and I know there's particular instances and particular economic circumstances which could actually cause that. I won't go into that now. But the reality is, it's not that easy. If I said to you, here's £100,000, Rob, now I want you to go and lose it all in property and show me when your bank account's down to zero, you'd probably struggle. I know that sounds flippant, but it's absolutely true. So definitely having the right mindset, being prepared to persevere when things get tough, being prepared to borrow the money, and then taking action, going off and actually doing it. I meet so many people who are so genuine about their desire, but for whatever reason, they never actually get out there and do it. A lot of the time, I think, it's because there's the risk of being perfectionist, being caught in the perfectionist's trap, which is you want to have the perfect plan, find the perfect strategy, and then find the perfect deal, and then negotiate the perfect deal. And by the time you've done all of that, you're never going to get anywhere, of course, and a lot of people don't. Sometimes you just have to accept it's not going to be that great, but I'm going to do something, and I'll get better as I go along.
Basically, shit happens, deal with it.
Yeah, of course it does.
In a nutshell. In terms of rolling back, because a great point you've just raised there, we started on similar circumstances in terms of funding the first deal. So how you funded the money is very similar to how I funded my first deal as well. Did you feel any... when you speak to people, and as you say, a lot of people might say, well, I'm a bit... I'm scared of borrowing the money, and even more so if it's a family member. Did you feel any extra pressure borrowing that money off your mum in the first place, or was it, you had complete supreme confidence in what you were doing and the numbers, even though you're not a numbers man, as you say? Did you just have supreme confidence in the deal and you just had to do it just to see what happened?
Yeah, the latter. Because, if you think about it logically, I was buying a house. And unless I burn the house down or knock it down, that house isn't going to be worth zero. And even if I knock the house down, there's the land, which is going to be worth something. So I never, ever anticipated that I was going to be in a position where I was losing my mum's money. I think the practicality which anybody should consider, though, when they're going into borrowing money off somebody, is when you pay it back, how long is it going to take to pay it back, and what the exit is. Because it could be, for example, if the property hadn't sold, it might have taken longer to pay my mother back, or if it hadn't sold for quite the price that I wanted it to sell for. Having said that, though, I was anticipating making a profit, so there was a buffer there anyway. So ultimately, probably the worst downside would be I'd pay my mum back, but I just wouldn't have a profit. which means I've done a 6-month refurb for nothing. But at least my mum would have made out of it because I'd still have paid her. So all of these things, when you think about it, a lot of the stuff we worry about, actually, when you think about it logically, it's just not there. So, no, I was supremely confident, but not in a reckless way. But, if I've got a house and I do it up and I make it even more valuable, how am I going to lose money on it?
Very good point, mate. I had a similar question from a family member for borrowing funds for the first property I bought. And it was a question that they asked was, well, what's the worst case scenario? And, my answer at the time, it gets quite flippant. It remains flippant to this day. It was, well, unless a nuclear attack happens and the whole thing gets completely destroyed, if it's still standing, all that can happen is it can go up or down in value.
Absolutely.
The asset's there.
Absolutely. Now, somebody might be listening to this and thinking, well, but, properties do go down in value. There is a property crash coming, which is absolutely true. There is a property crash coming. We just don't know when. Is it going to be this year or is it going to be in 10 years? We don't know, but it will happen. But if you've done your figures, if you've done your due diligence, if there's enough buffer, as I say, I was building in a profit. Well, if the worst happened and property values fell, then it would just be my profit which was eaten away. My mum would still get her money back. It might affect the amount of time that it might take to sell the property, though, if I was selling it. But another way of looking at it could be that maybe you borrow money from a third party with a view to refurbishing the property, letting it out, and then getting a mortgage on the property and using that mortgage to pay back the person who's lent you the money. Well, of course, in those circumstances, the market could dip a bit, fair enough, same comments apply. Or it could be that the valuer comes around and downvalues the property and you don't get as much money out as you hope. But the answer to that is, before you even take the money, sit down with your partner, with your financier, your JV partner as we call it nowadays, and say to them, this is what could happen. What should we do if this happens? And you could have an arrangement whereby, I'm going to remortgage, but if I can't get all of the money back out, I'll give you as much as I can. And whatever's left in the property, I'll pay you interest at a very good rate. And they may be perfectly happy with that.
It's about not being fearful of those conversations, as there are going to be times where you have great conversations with people in property, because again, you might look to link up and joint venture on, a deal that's going to put a lot of money in your back pocket. And there might be times where, as you say, a valuer might come in, you get down value or something happens. You might have to have a sort of a more negative conversation with someone. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it just comes down to communication. If you're good at communicating and listening to what other people want, I find that you can normally tailor everything so that everyone, gets a win-win, no matter whether the news is good or the news is not so good.
Well, I think it's absolutely crucial. And communication and listening are the key things, aren't they? And the best way to communicate is to listen first. And most upsets around a JV usually happen because people have a different idea of what's actually happening, or they have a different idea about what the outcome is going to be, or they have a different idea about what's going to happen in certain circumstances. And it can actually be down to the use of words. I have this with my wife sometimes. I won't say all the time in case she listens to this, but we can have a conversation and we can use words which I know what the words mean, but her use of the words are completely different. With a JV partner, being a bit less flippant about it, but with a JV partner, that can happen. So you can describe a circumstance or an outcome, and then a year later, when you talk to them about it, they'll say, yeah, I know you said that, but to me, that means this. And you say, no, it doesn't mean this, it meant that. And that's where the conflict then comes, even though you might have been using the same words to describe what you thought was the same thing. Does that make sense? I sort of feel like I'm waffling a bit here.
No, I'm not in a way. It makes sense. It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Definitely, because words can have different meanings, and this is why you might write something down, and if you've emailed something to someone, your perception of that when you read it can be completely different from when you're doing what we're doing now. We're face to face. We're having a conversation. So be careful to communicate in the most effective way for yourself and your joint venture partner as well.
Absolutely.
What would you say the biggest challenge, the single biggest challenge that you've faced in your time in property has been, and why?
Goodness, that's a hard one. I think probably 3 spring to mind, and I'm not quite sure which order they would be in. I think the first one is just around the whole thing about raising money anyway. And that's something, I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and talk about it, but because I'm naturally shy, that has been one of those comfort zones I've had to push through. So learning how to raise finance and being comfortable with that was a challenge. But that's why I can sit on the other side and encourage other people, hopefully, and say, actually, it's not as bad or as hard as you think. You just need to go and do it, because that's my experience. I think the second one, which is a very practical thing, is what happened when the credit crunch came. Because when the credit crunch came, as I said earlier, I am Mr. Buy-to-Let. And suddenly, I had this situation where the banks weren't lending any money anymore, and also the value of my portfolio was falling, and that was a bit awkward. Now, of course, every upside has a downside, and every downside has an upside, and every problem is an opportunity, and it was a great time to buy. But it took me a little bit of time to actually change my mindset to go from sort of like apocalyptic thinking, oh no, the world's falling in, to actually, this is a brilliant time to be buying. I just need to work out how to do it under these new circumstances. So that was a challenge. But a useful learning exercise for whenever the next crash comes as well. But then I think the third challenge, and this is probably the one which is always there, and is probably one of my biggest challenges, is making sure that I keep going. Motivation, perhaps, is a better way of putting it. Keeping myself motivated. Because if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, businessman, investor, whatever, at the end of the day, it's down to you to make sure that things happen. And that's been one of my biggest things, making sure that I keep going, making sure that I do the things that I need to do. Because like many other people, there's some things which I don't really fancy doing. Believe it or not, I don't really like going and talking to estate agents. I think you share that with me. Nothing against estate agents, but you just think, oh, here we go again. You got 15th estate agent today. But you've got to do that to get the deals, and you have to make sure that you keep doing it. You have to make sure that you do the stuff you don't really want to do, like ringing up the mortgage broker, going and submitting all the documents. I hate admin. So whenever I talk to my mortgage broker about raising finance, I know they're going to say, okay, well, can you give us do a new spreadsheet? Can you send us in your bank statements? Oh, I don't want to do that. It's just tedious. It's got to be done. So motivation, I think motivation.
Yeah, talking of time of recording, two things that spring to mind on that is Matt, Rachel and myself, we always have the same sort of joke that if Matt and Rachel walk into an estate agent or lettings agency, then normally, they get on really well with everyone, the putty in their hands, etc., and so forth. Matt can charm anyone, so can Rachel. If I walk in, I just get this stone cold look of, what are you doing here? Get out. So I'm normally going, I'll run out and start crying down the street or something like that. I'm not a massive fan of dealing with estate or lettings agents. I do love you, you're fantastic, but yeah, certainly played your strengths on that. And the second point, admin could be a bit of a pain in the backside. That being said, if you've got the right systems in place and the right people and the right understanding, because everyone's educated one another about how they like to do things, I normally find that offsets the ball ache of admin to an extent. I don't know if that's something that resonates with you.
Yeah, no, you've got to have the right systems. But of course, the thing is, we don't know at the beginning what we know at the end. So looking back now, if I'd known, I'd probably set up different processes and systems. Yeah. Maybe this is one of the great things about all the training and mentorship and stuff, education that we can get nowadays, because when I started, nobody was really talking about this stuff. But yes, you're absolutely right. And not being scared to outsource either. A lot of people see outsourcing and getting somebody to come in and help them as a cost, whereas of course it's not, it's an investment. If it takes something off your desk, which is just tedious admin, which means that then you've got the ability and the time and the freedom to go and do the two things which every property investor should be doing, which is raising finance and finding deals. That's a much better use of your time.
Quickly touching on the leverage before we look to wrap up. Leverage can mean so many things to so many people. So we've just touched there briefly on leverage and admin, for example. Once you come to think about it, we automatically, we leverage out in quite a lot of ways, don't we? Because assuming that you're not self-managing property, you use a lettings agent. So that's leverage. Admin is admin. If you've got a mortgage broker, they'll obviously go and broker your mortgage for you. They get paid for that, so you're leveraging out that. Solicitors as well. Maybe a lot of DIY, but again, that might come from the lettings agent. So actually doing that and surrounding yourself with a really knowledgeable team as a property investor can really help you to go and do exactly what you just said, Peter, which should be going to raise finance and finding deals.
Yeah, and that's what you should be aiming at. And again, I get a little bit alarmed when I'm talking particularly to newbies who are already planning in their own mind how they can go down to Wicks and get a big bucket of magnolia because they want to go and do all the painting and the refurb. Maybe for the first one or two, maybe just to learn how it all works, maybe to save a little bit of money, maybe. But really, your ultimate aim should be getting yourself out of the property side so that you can run the business. And the business is all about finding the deals and all about finding the finance.
And then utilising that until you get to a level where you're comfortable and you're happy. So for yourself, it's keep going. For myself, keep going. But if you're, so we touched on this earlier on, didn't we, about there being no right or wrong. So for someone, if it's about getting 10 houses of multiple occupation and they're happy and they're very hands-on, but that's working for them, then really there is nothing wrong with that at all. Is there? It's, if it works for you and you're enjoying what you're doing, then that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any last words of wisdom for people listening in that they can benefit from yourself?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a tough question, isn't it?
That sounded really psychopathic, didn't it? Any last words of wisdom, and then we'll see what happens. Let me rephrase that before we wrap up. Yeah, do you have any last words of wisdom that you'd be able to, anything poignant that you'd be able to share with the audience?
I'm assuming that most people are going to be listening to this because they want to make some kind of a change in their life. So what I would say is commit to make the change, whatever that means to you. And in a property context, one of the things which I do see, and one of the reasons why I think some people struggle when they say they want to get into property and it doesn't quite happen, is because they start without a clear idea of what it is they want to achieve from property. I think you need to know what your end result is going to be. Now, that's not necessarily set in stone, and it'll probably happen that over time you'll find that you can achieve far more than you ever thought you could. But at least have that point in your mind. That's what you're going to do this for. Then understand why you want to achieve that. Again, I think that's a step which a lot of people don't necessarily take. And I'm not talking about hours and hours of navel gazing in this, but it would help to some extent. You need to understand what's making you tick and why you need to do it. For me, it was freedom. I didn't necessarily know it in those words, but that's what has driven me to do the things that I've done to get to where I am today, because I wanted the freedom. You will have something which is driving you as well. So think about what you want to achieve, think about why you want to achieve it. And then, as you said earlier, Rob, and I know that you're really good at this, is just putting it down in writing as a series of goals. And it could be 6 months, 12 months, 5 year, 10 year. When you get out to sort of 5 year, 10 year, it all becomes a bit sort of, vague. And, in my mind anyway, I find that really hard. But just stick something down so that you're aiming for something. It's going to change over time anyway. The key ones are your 6 month goals and your year goals. And then set yourself a challenging target. And it may be, if you want to change your life and maybe you're thinking it's through property, maybe the challenge is, right, this year I'm going to buy 5 properties. Now, the thing is, you're not going to buy them tomorrow. And it might take you 6 months or 9 months to get the processes in place, to get the education, to get the understanding of the strategy before you even start to buy. So you might end up actually buying 5 properties in your last 3 months. But set the target and challenge yourself to do it. And you might be thinking, well, I haven't got the money. Well, there's the challenge. Go and find the money. Because you can. I know you can. What am I saying? I'm basically saying commit to doing it and then do it. Well, summarizing it, commit to do it. It's about taking action. It's not about talking. It's about taking action. And the more you take action, the more will happen. One thing, actually, just thought of this. This is absolutely true as well. This is one of these sort of big sort of dichotomies. This where property is a little bit strange, because on the one hand, Tony Robbins, who I admire immensely, self-help guru, motivational guy, he will tell you take massive action. And I agree with that. Take massive action. But the irony is that success, not just in property, but in many, many fields, is all about the small things done consistently. So whilst you're doing the massive action stuff, also make sure that you're doing the consistent small steps, doing them daily. It might be just going on to Rightmove for half an hour every day and checking your area, making sure that you haven't missed any properties coming on the market. It could be maybe just doing 5 viewings a week. It could be just making sure that you ring a mortgage broker once a week until you find the right one who understands what you want to do and who gels with you. But there will be a number of small actions which, done consistently, will also lead to success.
Very poignant. Very poignant. I think that's some fantastic advice there, that doing the little things consistently will help. Over time, they will snowball into the...
It's the compound effect.
Actually, the 8th wonder of the world, I think. Is that what Einstein... someone said it somewhere.
Einstein, yeah.
Yeah, it was Einstein that said
compound
that.
interest is the 8th wonder of the world. Absolutely.
Do the small things, do them consistently, and then over time, you will find that you will start getting the results. And in property, 9 times out of 10, those results are the physical accumulation of assets.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
And Peter, I always like to refer. I mean this politely. I like to refer to you as a wise wizard, because I must admit it's a lot of the stuff that we also said off topic as well was fascinating. So thank you for your time on this. You mentioned a couple of things and services that you did that you started to get back into. So how do people find out more about you?
Very kind of you to ask, Rob. Well, come to my website, www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk. I've got a number of resources there, some free resources, I've got some paid resources, home study courses which I've built around property, and I also do a little bit of mentoring as well. But it's all on my website, so come to www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, or you can find me on Facebook. I've got my own Facebook channel, again, The Property Teacher, and come and like my Facebook page, The Property Teacher.
Perfect.
There's a theme there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. There's a very consistent theme. I like it. We'll put all the links to that in the show notes as...
That's great, thank you.
Well, Peter, just once again, thank you for your time, and happy buy-to-letting, and hopefully that planning development gets done and dusted.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it does.
All the best. Take care.
Thank you.